Hi everybody. We're going to get started. We've got a few other people on their way, but I want to introduce myself real quickly. I'm the Associate Director of the Center on Legal Profession. We've got a great speaker here for you today talking about innovation in the legal profession, which is sort of an interesting concept still. Additionally, Reena will be here tonight at another event that we're doing, a book launch event this evening for Heidi Gardner's book, which is about smart collaboration. So if you do have an opportunity, I encourage you all to attend tonight's event. But today, for lunch, we've got Reena SenGupta here, who's the founder of RSG Consulting, which was founded in 2001, provides research and consultancy to law firms and in-house counsel. She's over 20 years of experience of business in the city. She is known as one of the leading analysts of the legal profession. And in 2005, she came up with the idea of ranking lawyers on innovation, which has become the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers Report and Awards. She's a longtime contributor to the Financial Times and has helped to establish the paper's Law and Business page in 2001. She was a finalist in the Asian Women of Achievement Awards in 2009 for Media Professional of the Year, and she's responsible for coming up with the ideas for a number of the groundbreaking projects for both clients and RSG Consulting. Among these are the RSG India Report, the 21st Century Series of Reports for Eversheds, and an innovative GC Club. So obviously we've got an expert in innovation and the law, and I ask you all to join me in welcoming Reena.
Thank you. So it's really great to be here and have a chat to you and whilst we're having your lunch. So I'm hoping I'm going to be able to entertain you a little bit and make this a little bit more exciting. So maybe I'll just sort of kick in and just say, we founded the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers Program. Maybe I just have, how many of you know what that is? Okay, all right. So for those of you that don't know, it is basically a ranking and awards program for lawyers. It's been going for 12 years. We published 22 special reports, and as you see, we've got 11 in Europe, 7 in the States, North America, 3 in Asia Pacific, and 1 special report with General Counsel. We also do a summit, and it has become a real program in the profession. Those are all the countries that we cover, pretty much over 50 countries now, and my company does all the research. So, I had this idea for it, and it has become a beast that is Innovative Lawyers. But what does the research mean? And this is where my comments are going to come from today. So the research, in numbers, there are over 8,500 submissions. We've done over 10,000 interviews. All of that probably equates to about 15,000 hours of research. And, Malcolm Gladwell is right that 10,000 hours is the magic number of greatness, and that's what it took the Beatles to be fantastic. We're on our way to probably writing the legal innovation anthem of love, love we do. It's been a hard decade slog, because actually it has been a hard kind of slog in some ways, because when we started the programme, not many people thought that lawyers could innovate. In fact, when the FT approached me and said, let's do a ranking of lawyers, I said, great. And they said, we want to do it on how much money lawyers earn. And I said, no, let's not do it on how much money lawyers earn. That's really boring. Let's do it on innovation. And they turned around to me and said, well, that's an oxymoron. And, you're probably right at that point. It was back in 2005. And the thing is, actually, I had a ton of friends and partners in member circle firms, and they said, look, Reena, and I floated the idea by them, and they said, look, Reena, the thing is, lawyers aren't innovative. And their concept of innovation was Steve Jobs and inventing the iPod. And even yesterday, actually, I was in New York, and I had a coffee with a Wachtell partner who said, look, I've got a real problem with your reports. And I said, why? He said, he said, I just don't think what we do is innovative. And it's, you can call it different things. He said he'd like to call it process technologies or being subtle. Innovation is a better word, I think. But it's, the skeptics probably have good reason to think that lawyers can't innovate. If you think about it, there's some inherent obstacles. The training is all about precedent, it looks backward. Law firms are sort of structured around hierarchy and status. The cultures are intolerant of mistakes. They attract risk-averse people, and there's an assumption, and there certainly was an assumption, that the lawyer's role is inherently passive and reactive. And you'd be hard-pressed to describe law firms or law departments as sort of sweet spots of innovation. It's not going to happen. And when we researched our first report in 2006, we couldn't even use the word innovation because nobody knew what it meant, when we were talking about lawyers. And so we had to say things like, exceeding expectations, or were you surprised by your lawyers? And it was, or did they deliver exceptional value? We had to put it in different terms for them to see what it meant. But I was pretty convinced that innovative lawyers would fly, and against all these sort of naysayers, and persevered, and it has flown. But I guess the reason I thought it would fly is because I'd spent years, my previous incarnation before I founded RSG, I've been at Chambers and Partners, the guides to the legal profession, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I invented the ranking system for Chambers, and I also set it up as a research book, and this was in the 90s, and we did thousands and thousands of interviews with clients. And then when I set up RSG in 2001, my first consulting assignments were being commissioned by top law firms to go and talk to their clients. And I would go and talk to these clients, and then I would prepare these reports. I'd hear their sort of woes and their complaints. I would say this back to the law firms that had commissioned me, and the law firm partners would say, oh, that's very interesting, thank you very much. Take the report and do absolutely nothing with it. And then commission me again the following year to go back to the same clients and do the same research. And it was disheartening, to say the least. And it seemed to me that a sector that had the supply and demand side so out of sync was one that would have to change. And not only that, when I've been talking to all these clients, I realised that they found it very difficult to differentiate between their firms, and ranking guides such as Chambers and Partners were not helping them. So I thought a ranking with innovation would help to sort of highlight these differences. And there are other reasons too, because even though the early noughties we saw double-digit growth for law firms, I thought that the firms were facing this huge conundrum around how do they create and maintain competitive advantage. And that, coupled with globalisation and technology, I felt the sector was on the brink of massive upheaval that they would need to change. Anyway, that's the official version. The unofficial version was I was having an existential crisis. I'd been talking to all of these clients. I was a broad witness. And I got this internship with Tobey Maguire, who's playing Spider-Man, the old Spider-Man, in Hollywood. And I was sitting there in Hollywood, I was in my late 30s, thinking I'm going to become a penniless scriptwriter. Then kind of had an epiphany, realised I wasn't, and I thought I had to make lawyers more interesting. So I came back and set up. But it was that's the unofficial version. But the official version also stands. But back to this question. Can lawyers innovate? So rewind to our very first report, 2006, when we put our toe into the innovation pond. It was probably more of a puddle, but anyway, we put our toes in, and we received submissions from lots of firms. And the reason I've got a picture of the BlackBerry there is because one of the lovely submissions, we didn't rank it incidentally, but was from Slaughter and May, who said, we're really innovative because we've given all our partners a BlackBerry. And we thought, right, this is where we're starting, this is the stage of play. And, but we saw some interesting things. There was a firm that had set up a TV channel to give legal advice, employment legal advice. That was quite fun. But we were also looking at things like firms saying, we put all of our libraries onto CD-ROM, and that was interesting. But there were some lawyers who were doing things differently, and this chap here, his name's Derek Southall, and he was a partner at RAG & Co, and still a partner at Gowling's WRG as it is now. And he came across my radar, because when I was actually interviewing the General Counsel of Marks & Spencer, which is a big retail company in the UK, the General Counsel was giving me a reference for Slaughter and May as it happened. And then halfway through the interview, he just went, oh, God, we're talking about innovation. If we're talking about innovation, there is one man in the UK that is innovating. And it's this guy, Derek Southall. There he is, Derek, with his owl. And he said, you should really talk to him and see what he's doing. What Derek was doing then, he had set up, he decided to go and talk to the FTSE 100 General Counsel and advise them on how they were using technology for free. And he thought that would be a good way to develop relationships and hopefully get work for his firm, because actually, frankly, these companies wouldn't really instruct dragging code. And, but he thought if he built up the relationships, helped them with something that was, puzzling and challenging them, and something he was passionate about, it would be another way of doing business development and client service. And it was phenomenally successful. So, so we did sort of see some sort of innovation. But I guess the real answer to the question of can lawyers innovate comes through how you define innovation. And when we started, we did a lot of research into other lists. I looked at how other publications were ranking companies. We looked at the economic definition, researched lawyers and how they defined it. And it was one of our sort of guiding questions. And so what do we think? I just thought I'd quickly tell you what our definition of it is. And this is where we started. And it comes from the fact that we had to talk about innovation in terms of value when we began. And but we knew it was more than value. It's wrapped up in the concept of it, but it goes beyond it. So innovation, we felt, was this idea of the wow factor. It was leadership. It was sort of behaviours and services that ensured clients' loyalty. It was the thing that sort of established a law firm's identity. It's improvements that bring tangible value to the client or consumer that changes the way they experience lawyers and the law. It's not invention, but it can be. It's doing things differently in a way that's sustainable and replicable and ultimately change the way in which law firms and legal departments function. And often, when we see innovations, particularly in terms of legal expertise, they're often bespoke. It's not every day that we see a poison pill. But they're one-offs. But we rank the ones that are replicable and are scalable. The other way we define innovation, and I'll tell you a little bit about our scoring methodology and how we rate the submissions that we get. And I might give you a bit of insight into how we define it. So we rate the innovations that we see, or the entries that we see, on 3 criteria. One is originality, rationale, and impact. And we've used that for the last 12 years. And originality and impact is fairly it's self-explanatory. But the rationale score we put in because we were ranking services, we were ranking professional services. So if we were ranking widgets, we'd have done originality and impact. But we felt that we had to put something in that measured behaviours. And when we looked at rationale, you could also call that a proactivity score. Because back then, when we were starting it, one of the big complaints I had from clients was that lawyers were too reactive. They weren't commercial. They didn't listen to them. They didn't understand the bigger picture. And so we were sort of thinking how, that score was around how much of the lawyers driven the solution, how much have they got into the driving seat of the car. And then it was, it was still relatively unusual. But having said that, in 2017, we've actually changed that rationale score. We've renamed it. And we're calling it leadership. Because frankly now most lawyers are proactive. They are commercial. They have to be. If they're not going to, win work. So that's something that's happened over the last 12 years. And now we're thinking, actually, no, we need to look at this idea of leadership. And so we've sort of moved on. And I guess what has happened with this whole program that we run, it means that we have this very granular view about how the lawyer is changing, both in private practice and in-house. And so to us, an innovative law firm or legal department is also one that's thinking about their roles and actively shaping their development so they're better suited and relevant to the needs of their clients, their people, and society. So just a quick thing, where do we look at innovation? We look at in-house, we look at private practice. Private practice, we tend to look for innovation in these 3 buckets: business of law, the practice of law, and social responsibility. On the in-house side, we look at it in terms of the lawyer as a legal advisor, as an operational manager, a purchaser, a strategic advisor, a risk advisor, and a thought leader. So it's our kind of innovation wheel that we use to assess in-house legal departments. And back in 2007, when we started, an innovative in-house legal department, it was quite surprising, could drive economic value for the business. That was we had a kind of Maslowian pyramid, and that was our apex. Now, our apex would be a legal department that actually generates revenues and isn't seen as a cost centre. And we do an awful lot of research with chief executives about in-house legal departments. And one of the things that we always ask them, we say, do you think your legal department can give you a competitive advantage? And they fall into two camps, yes and no. The second thing is we ask, do you see them as a cost centre or a revenue generator, or are they somewhere between? And these kind of questions sort of help us assess how the department is functioning. I mean, not every company actually wants their legal department to be a revenue generator. And they do have different functions in different industries. But it's a good rule of thumb for us to see actually how legal departments are progressing. On the private practice side, the business of law, or things like obviously management, people, client service, technologies, and the practice of law is around, we looked at the big pillars of practice: litigation, finance, corporate. But what is innovation in these areas changes. It's changing all the time. So what we were ranking as innovative in terms of the business of law back in 2009 is not something we would rank now. So 2009, we got a submission from Clifford Chance. They'd outsourced 100 people to India, and back office staff and lawyers, and that was quite interesting. RPO was sort of quite innovative. By 2012, we were getting like 50, 60 submissions from firms that were doing it. So it's no longer innovative. And firms would be kind of miffed with them and say, well, you ranked it before. And I'm going, yes, but that was when it was innovative. So, it's a moving thing. I mean, something more up to date. I mean, something like design thinking. So we first started hearing firms using design thinking in 2015. And David, you brought Rochelle last year to the summit. And we had maybe one law department and one law firm that told us they were using it. And it was really exciting. We were really excited. Oh my God, this is really interesting. By actually last year, there were probably about 18 to 20 UK law firms are saying, we're using design thinking, full stop. That makes us innovative. And obviously we were kind of like going, no, it's how you're using it, and what kind of client experience are you changing, and how are you applying it. And it's no longer innovative in itself. So it's all, the benchmarks are always shifting. And the same is true with technology. I mean, we used to have a use of technology section, but I suspect we'll never have that, because everybody's using technology. It's meaningless. So what we're interested in is how lawyers and technology are coming together, and how that confluence is changing. Again, experience with clients, experience with people. So it's a never-ending cycle. These little benchmarks that we have, it keeps moving, constantly moving. So, but where are we now? What would we think of as innovative legal advice, today? And I think it's really exciting, because I think lawyering is becoming multi-dimensional. And the top deals and matters that we're looking at from law firms across the world and in-house teams, it's kind of showing us that what is required from top lawyers is changing. And the problems that business and society are facing are far more complex. And even what would appear to be one track through legal problems actually require a number of specialist legal areas to answer. And maybe when we began, back in 2006, we might have given a pure technical legal solution a standout entry, a standout ranking. But actually, over the past few years, most of our standout entries have probably encompassed 1, 2, and 3 on this hexagon. And I think what's interesting right now is what constitutes legal advice is changing, the content of it's changing. So you have your practice of law, your expertise, but actually you've got this whole idea of sort of data and knowledge and how you break down lawyers' knowledge. And a great example of this, I think, is the Kirkland & Ellis M&A database, which is very interesting. They dominate the mid-market private equity space, and what they've done with every single one of their M&A transactions is break them into 50 data points. And what that's done is created a different way of analysing their experience and their knowledge of these deals and how they work. And so we hear comments from firms like Latham & Watkins, oh my God, we got defeated by the Kirkland database. It's extraordinary. And when we did our research around it, we talked to a lot of Kirkland's clients, and we said, well, would you end up subscribing to it? And they said, well, probably. They weren't at the time, this was about 3 years ago, but Kirkland can now charge for the knowledge in this database. And so it's enhanced their lawyering, it's enhanced their practice. And it's changing so many things, actually, if you think about it, extrapolate that. You've then now got younger lawyers that can access that database and sort of have the experience that, say, a 20-year lawyer in practice might have. So the content is really changing. And then, of course, the way in which the law is being delivered is also really important. And that's sort of a fee arrangement, that could be the channels, it's sort of using pictures, it's how it's sort of consumed is becoming far more critical. And I think what's interesting about the delivery model is that I hear all the time, I'm sure a lot of the consultants in this room will also hear, you hear from major elite law firms saying, well, we don't need to be operationally innovative and change how we do it because we work on bet the farm matters and people come here for our expertise and our solutions. But actually, if one firm is working on a bet the farm matter, but is operationally innovative, why should the other firm down the road still be able to not be operationally innovative? And what is incredible, last year we're seeing examples of this happening. So there's a fantastic kind of case study around, there's a huge MasterCard litigation in the UK, which you may or may not know about, which involves all the major retailers, so like our big supermarkets, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Asda, it's a huge, huge, huge piece of litigation. And actually we got a submission from a firm called Mishcon, who had worked for Sainsbury's. But the way they had worked for Sainsbury's, it was a superb piece of legal expertise. The lawyering, this bit of specialist legal expertise, commercial context, this was fantastic. This was like, top of our tree, if you like. But they also included these two things. So they did it on a success fee, and their fees overall, even though they were profitable on it, was so much lower than any one of the other parties to the litigation. They also got an early win on it, and they also used kind of data science, they collaborated. It was sort of a template of how legal advice is going. And I'm thinking, that's really interesting because we talked to a lot of the other parties, and some of the other clients were saying, actually, I wish I'd instructed Mishcon. But, there you are. So, what does this all mean? I think it means that there's a fundamental shift in silo thinking, which has bedeviled the legal profession, to a much broader outlook, more open thinking. I think we're seeing lawyers embrace other disciplines, and it's sort of an acceptance that the professional qualifications that lawyers sort of had and they've prided themselves on having for so long is not necessarily going to be enough for the practice of law, going forward into the 21st century. And ultimately, right now, what does it mean? Is that obviously lawyers have to collaborate. And one of the big trends that we've seen is just how this universe of collaboration has changed and collaborators. So for us, it's one of the critical drivers of innovation. Around in the middle is sort of the internal collaboration. So, Heidi's work, is around about sort of lawyers sort of collaborating over practice areas. Obviously lawyers need to collaborate across offices. But actually what I think is really interesting, what's happening now, is that lawyers are really beginning to collaborate with their business professionals, their heads of business development, their heads of HR, the CIOs. They're really kind of coming of age, if you like. And I find that really exciting. So many of those people in those roles are good friends of mine and have had taken jobs over the last 20 years in law firms and been incredibly demoralised because they're not respected for their skills and their talents and they can't do their jobs. But suddenly we're seeing so much more kind of lawyer, business professional collaboration, and that's driving a lot of the initiatives that we see. And it's a step change, really. So, so that's kind of exciting. Firms are getting better at collaborating internally, but obviously they've got this whole kind of universe of other people they could collaborate with, and the critical group, obviously, is clients. And, and we're seeing much better collaborations between clients, so much so that actually in our rankings, we don't, if the private practice law firm puts in an entry, more than likely, if it's good enough, we can see it's been a partnership, so we award the client behind the deal or matter or whatever as well. It's yeah, so it's an exciting place for firms at the moment, but it also means sort of, I think, a change in behaviour. You know, talking about the way clients are working, we've seen some kind of extraordinary examples. Accenture, for example, they've got a panel of 3 firms, it's Baker, McKenzie, Mofo and A&O, and they've said to those 3 firms, you have to work together. You have to share precedents. Sometimes I want to have only one bill. It's extraordinary, I want to use the same platforms, the same technologies, and they've been doing that for the last 3 years. We were active, the Accenture team was as innovative about 3 years ago. And it's just completely different. It's completely changing the way that these 3 firms work with each other and how they think about their precedents and their own knowledge and various things like that. Another example that we had last year was John Schultz, who's the General Counsel of HPE. He had this massive case with Oracle, huge piece of litigation. And what he said was, right, no one law firm can do this. I'm going to take the top trial lawyers from 4 different law firms, and they're all going to have to work together like they are one law firm. So he put these 4 competing partners together in a room and said, let's work out the strategy, because I've got you in for all your different strengths. And again, you know, HP defeated Oracle. It wasn't on the cards. They did, you know, Oracle really put a huge defence together. They were represented by Latham, and not only did HP defeat Oracle, their bill was something more like 50% of the fee that Latham charged. It was, you know, so all sorts of things going on, and I think it's really interesting when the clients are sort of driving those kind of collaborations between law firms. And I think it's become such an important issue, such an important driver, that we've created a whole chapter on it in all of our reports now this year, where we're going to ask firms and clients to send us, you know, the ways in which they're collaborating and working with different, you know, these different kind of. So anyway, collaboration is really important, and having said that, it is really important. So much of the innovation that we see over the last few years is obviously driven by the individual. It is individual lawyers that make the difference. The individual general counsel, the senior partner, the partner. And so we thought, well, what makes an innovative lawyer? And one of the things that we do, we put this together, and this sort of fascinates me, we featured probably over the years 210 individuals in our top 10s across the world. And, you know, when we research them, we ask them how they innovate, we look at their innovations, their passions. We ask them this question, we asked them what they wanted to do when they were 12 years old, because apparently what you wanted to do when you were 12 years old actually shows what your true inner self desires. Anyway, we know what their clients think, we know what their peers think, and what their friends think about them, how they're rated professionally, personally. And what we realised was that they share similar traits. And we identified them in the following way. And the first one was this idea of mastery. And we've got this concert pianist there because it is like the idea of a concert pianist. You know, it's the lawyer that has complete mastery over all the technical details, is a really great lawyer, is also completely masterful about the client as well that they're working for. So it's both the law and the client. To the point where, you know, like you can learn to play the piano and you can know the notes, but you really have to master the music to create a symphony. And that's kind of the analogy we were sort of thinking about with the lawyers. And then the second one was this idea of influence. And this came out of, actually post the credit crisis research that we did, but it's the ability to kind of orchestrate people and situations. It's like being the anchor in a room, the calm head and storm. And it's this sort of ability to have that charisma and gravitas. And if we just had 1 and 2, we reckon that would be an excellent lawyer. But we're looking for innovative lawyers. So the point where we think the lawyers leap forward is when they show boldness. And we've literally got the guy leaping across the chasm. But it's the individuals that are not scared of taking a risk, and not terrified of making mistakes. And it's the point, when a lawyer can step up from being excellent to innovating. And then the last sort of characteristic we saw is this idea of difference. And we called it many things. In fact, we originally used to call it transversality, because I had a philosophy graduate on my team who's really clever, and so he thought that would be a good idea. But anyway, we're calling it different stuff. But the transversal line is the line that links two parallel lines. And the idea being that it's the ability to link different experiences, different skills, different sort of educational backgrounds, and sort of have a kind of horizontal view. And there's a fantastic study by Stanford Business School on successful entrepreneurs, of their MBA students and who became successful entrepreneurs. And they found the ones that became successful entrepreneurs were far more likely to have horizontal networks. And what's really, really interesting, if you look at our early lists, I have to tell you, the first few lists were probably 10 male, pale, stale men, and they don't look particularly like they're different. But actually, when you go into their backgrounds, you can sort of see actually they've lived different places, they've got massive passions and hobbies, and they have these horizontal networks which has enabled them to think differently. And, innovative lawyers are not terribly different to innovators in business and science and medicine, and we think they display all the traits of associational thinking, discovering, observing, experimenting, networking. That I think is hopefully encouraging to people, but there aren't that many. We don't find that many. Sometimes it's a struggle for us to find our 10, I believe. But, so we've done all this research, and I was thinking I'd share with you what continues to surprise us about our research and one of our big observations. And it's about this disconnect between clients and partners. And so we've been doing this for years. The way we do it is through a case study approach. We get submissions in from firms, and we talk to the client, and we talk to the partner. And you've got to reckon firms are putting their best submissions forward. But we can weed out 50% of them, because when we talk to the client and the partner, they are not aligned. And it's not that the clients are giving them bad reviews, but they disagree about whether the lawyer was innovative, where the value lay, and the client is often appreciating the lawyer for sort of skills and attributes that the lawyer doesn't even know that they're exhibiting. It's an extraordinary sort of situation. And it's this disagreement over value, and I think the main thing is the fact is that lawyers really, really value their legal input. It's the thing that goes into the legal black box. Whereas the client values the commercial output, the experience, whether the project management was good, whether, the team worked well together, whether they resourced it well, communication, adaptability, flexibility, that type of thing. Whereas, of course, the lawyers always say, yes, well, we were brilliant lawyers. And that is where our value would lay. And I sort of have a theory about why this continues. And you've got to reckon, for me, this has been continuing for over 20 years of doing research into the legal sector. And I think one of the reasons, my theory anyway, around why it's happening is the way law firms are structured. Because I think law firms, because they're structured around their own practice areas, their own product lines, it makes them very internally facing. They're not really focused on their clients' businesses and their clients' solutions. And we've got the odd firm that's actually breaking out of this. Kingwood Mallesons in China, the head of Kingwood Mallesons in China is a guy called Zili Shao, who used to be the head of JP Morgan in China for 5 years. And he came back into the firm and he said, this is ridiculous. A bank would never organise ourselves like this. So he sort of changed the firm in China to be organised around sort of upstream and downstream, so to kind of try and reflect clients' pressures. And we're seeing other firms that are changing, actually. There's a firm in the southeast of England called ASB Law that's actually changing the way it's structured into the way the delivery process has worked. So they have people in the make side, the delivery side, and the sell side. Some firms have sort of set up industry groups in a way to try and get around that, but I think we're moving on from that. We have moved on from that. And I think one of the standout examples that we see anywhere, and it's sort of, they've been on a journey, is a small media firm called Shillings in the UK. And they realised that the threats facing their clients had fundamentally changed with the advent of social media. So they set off on this journey to move away from being practice area focused to being focused on what they considered to be their clients' main business and professional challenge, which was reputation risk. And then they realised that to support the clients on this front, they would need to buy other expertise in, which they can do in the UK and the legal service act. So they brought in a cyber business, cyber tech business, they brought in a risk business, they hired sort of ex-military personnel, and they've grown, but they employ less lawyers. So only gradually, they're going to get to a point where only 50% of the firm are lawyers. So they've had to do certain service lines, they've had to accrue other lines. They have to communicate differently between themselves. And the really interesting thing about this, they also have to educate their clients about their new offering. So they're actually creating their market, which, you know, if you read the kind of blue ocean strategy ideas, you know, it's kind of truly sort of innovative. They have to do business development differently. The way they communicate is more like a business. You know, they use pictures. It's very powerful how they get everyone to buy into the strategy. And the change has been so profound. They've got to the point now in their offices where nobody has an assigned desk. So you go into the office every day, you don't know where you're going to be sitting, but you might be sitting next to a cyber professional, or you might be sitting next to a risk guy, or you might be sitting next to another lawyer. You have no idea, but the idea is that they're spreading the expertise, they're encouraging cross-fertilisation, collaboration, so they can better serve their clients. And what they would call themselves now is not a law firm, but a reputation business. And I think that's, in a way, a microcosm of the future of how big law firms will start organising themselves internally. That's an idea, may not come to pass. So, no, we're running out of time a little bit, but what next? What next? So this is my view of the profession and how it has sort of evolved and what their challenges has been. And there have been a lot of challenges. So I guess when I started working in the sector, the discussion in the law firms all sort of centred around, well, what should we practice? There's a kind of like a crisis of what. Should we do private equity work? You know, I remember Stalker and Ray saying, oh no, I don't know if we can do private equity work, it's not what we do. And firms sort of withdrawing from private client work because it wasn't commercial. And you know, it was a kind of what we call a crisis about what. And then the debate sort of moved on to, well, where should we practice? Is internationalism really going to be the way forward? Should we have best friends relations? Should we, you know, be global, international? Will clients really want a one-stop shop? Will they want the best in every jurisdiction? And I sort of call that the crisis of where phase. And then it's not so completely linear. I mean, I would have to say now, if we got a submission from a law firm that said we just opened an office in Bucharest and this was really innovative, wouldn't do very well. So, but it might have done well if we were running the reports back then, because actually, you know, people weren't internationalising, and it was one of the big challenges that the profession was facing. So, you know, we probably would have ranked Clifford Chance's merger with Rogers and Wells in 2000 as innovative if we had been running our report then, because it was quite groundbreaking. Right, so, but then we go on to the crisis of how, and that's the whole thing about delivery models, efficiency, you know, and I think that's so interesting. Back in 2007, we conducted a survey of the top 50 UK managing partners, and we said, would you ever outsource? And 49 of them said, no way would we ever outsource, because we're not in that business and we don't do commoditised legal work. By 2012, nearly all of them had some form of LPO arrangement, their own captives, you know, they were outsourcing. So, you know, and I think generally now firms accept that efficiency is not a dirty word. And then I think, you know, we're sort of going through this, and I call it the kind of crisis of why, which is around competitive advantage, and this is sort of what I was thinking would happen, is, you know, why are law firms in business? What is their missions? What is their values? How do they differentiate from peers? You know, some of them are looking at innovation as the answer to that question. But I think what's quite interesting is if we're going forward, if we project ahead, we might be going through the crisis of who, you know. Because if you think about the number of alternative legal service providers, machine learning, you know, you start thinking, well, do legal services have to be delivered by lawyers or even humans? You know, does a general counsel need to be a lawyer? Many top GCs don't really do any lawyering anymore. In fact, they say to me they'd be terrified if they ever did do any lawyering. You know, and they're not really lawyers. So, you know, technology and managed legal service providers have become better. I mean, there's such an ecosystem of businesses out there, both in this country and in the UK and in Asia, that are offering very, very different services, and they're not called law firms. So, you know, and the savvy firms are actually owning these businesses. or bring them on board. So it's a component of their offering. So I think that's what we're sort of looking forward to. So I just want to end on an upbeat note though, which is, you know, back to my question of can lawyers innovate? And I have to say, I was reading the submissions last year, so we, you know, this big read through, and I kind of yelped in surprise, and I just went, oh my God, to my team, these are actually innovative. Okay, well that was year 11, and I was so excited. But actually what we were reading were submissions that would stand up in the corporate world, particularly in Europe, more so than North America. And lots was happening, you know, the spread of innovation across Europe was huge. You know, we saw firms experimenting, inventing, making significant improvements to their services. The pace of change was really fast. The speed at which firms were using that design thinking, a minimum viable product, you know, and experimenting and failing quickly and not minding. I mean, that was extraordinary. There's been a whole uptick in how firms are embracing technology, how they're working with clients to create products and services that benefit both sides. You know, content. The whole way in which firms are talking about their content is so exciting. The way they're talking about their thought leadership and the positions that they should take, using pictures to communicate instead of words. And then the last thing I think is what all that means is there just feels to me like there's been a real mindset that you know, lawyers are changing the way they behave. And you know, just as in the very fact that the CIOs and the CMOs are being so empowered and have a seat at the table. You know, there are 2 UK law firms where the CMOs actually sit on the board and are partners within the business. They have a phenomenal sway and they have huge impact. And I've never really seen that before, and that's all very exciting. So, would I say this big law elephant has sprouted these beautiful butterfly wings of innovation? Not quite yet. It's not going to fly yet. But there is real change happening, and I do think we really are seeing lawyers innovating. Thank you. So, any questions?
Floor is open. Here.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I had a question. So one of the interesting frames that you brought up was the one made by that guy, Chinese man in JP Morgan. I was wondering, outside of the West, with the developing countries moving forward, are they looking more innovative, or do they seem to be adopting some of the practices of Western offerings as they develop?
Are the Asian firms more
Yeah, Asian and
innovative?
African and Latin American, if there's been development there recently.
Not really. No, they're not really more innovative than the Western firms. But it's a funny sort of conundrum in Asia because on one level you see people experimenting and being able to experiment in ways that they would struggle to do here, like this guy Zili Shao. But it's a pocket, you know. It's not really. Or you see a firm like Nishit Desai, which is a firm in India, creating a very different kind of legal services business, or another firm like CLP. Yeah, so you have pockets of it, but there's still, the markets are still, you still have sort of recognisably sort of conservative law firms that are still modelling themselves on Mocktown, Slaughter and May than you know, Zico Law and A&O maybe. But it is changing. I mean, yeah, so I mean, the interesting about Asia, and this is the thing about some of the emerging jurisdictions, is that the role of the lawyer is very different. So in the US, the role of the lawyer is actually quite prominent on major commercial transactions, whereas, you know, in say an M&A transaction here would be 250 pages, you know, it might be 3 pages in India if you were lucky and it's actually documented. So, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but there is a different role for the lawyer in a lot of Asian jurisdictions than there is here. So, you know, it's that they can show innovation, but they're also quite behind as well.
Over here. Reena.
So I mean, I think it's pretty clear that for most law firms, I mean, that their biggest resource is their talent. And having just gone through kind of the recruiting process and then recently the summer associate process where you're kind of introduced to the law firm, one of the things I've been blown away by is sort of the lack of lack of innovation, and the lack of kind of use of data and things in terms of how firms are recruiting and training their lawyers. I mean, like, I had a firm tell me, like, well, when you get here, you'll get to experience our new mentoring program. And they looked at, they said it like they had just explained cold fusion. And it was like, it was like, you're coming up with this now? And like, looking at, what's your ROI on hosting a seminar at Harvard? You drop $4,000 on this event. Does that get you any more applicants? And they have no idea. And by and large, they have no idea. I was just wondering if you'd seen any innovation or any firms talking about talent retention, talent management, talent recruiting, things like
it's
that.
such an interesting question. We were running a people section in our European report, and we almost wanted to drop it because it's so weak. No, I mean, the short answer to that is not really. Saying very much that's interesting. I mean, possibly the most interesting thing I saw last year from any firm on the talent side, broadly, not the recruitment side, so not the talent side, was an initiative from Kirkland and Ellis around their alumni program, where they've hired, they've hired a small team. They've hired somebody from Accenture, and actually Accenture has actually called them up and said, "We want to know how you're doing it," which is extraordinary that you have a firm outside of the legal profession asking that other law firm. But what they've decided to do is actually you join Kirkland and Ellis, and you basically get career support for the rest of your life. Whether you stay in the law, or you leave the law, you go to a competitor firm, provided you aren't a terrible leaver, or there's been some disagreeing action, you have that support. Even if you want to go and do art or music at the age of 35 or something, and it's they say to me, or they have said to us that it's beginning to make a difference for them in terms of recruitment. That that's what they wanted to do, and they put a lot of resource behind it. But that's probably the most interesting thing I've seen. But otherwise, no. In terms of graduate recruitment, I mean, I discovered last year, it surprised me, that Allen over in the UK and a lot of the Magic Circle firms have never ever hired graduates from science and maths backgrounds, and now they were making a conscious effort to broaden their gene pool because the practice of law is changing, and they realise that the practice of law is changing. No, I'm afraid not. That's probably the best example of innovation I can give you.
So I have a question. On your graph that showed, the disconnect between where partners from large law firms are compared to clients, and that's just not changed, which is amazing over the years. It's much. What are your thoughts about how that will change eventually? Is it just the clients are going to continue to drive it, or will there? How do law firms get over that?
Well, I think it's around the restructuring of their businesses, actually, and thinking about clients in a different way. I mean, there are obviously exceptions to that.
Of course,
those are the ones that we rank as standout entries. And I think the firms are they getting better at it? No, actually, I don't think they are getting, as a whole, as a group, I don't think they are getting better at it. I mean, the ones that do and can sort of align themselves, I mean, some of it's around understanding what clients want and listening to them. I often think that, firms do these listening exercises, but they don't hear.
Or they put it to the side once they...
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of, that still happens. But you do see, you have individual partners in different firms who do get it right and do understand it. And it's if that experience can be spread. And if firms sort of, I mean, sometimes when I talk to law firms and I show them that slide, and actually what happens is there's a grid there, and I can actually show them how that grid is for them and their clients, and what things that they are always amazed. Do they do anything about it? I'm not entirely sure. But it amazes them, and some of it's just sort of not realising that there is a problem. It's a bit like, you think you're really happily married and you buy your wife daffodils, which is really sexy, but you buy your wife daffodils every Friday night or something, and she goes, "Thanks, darling, that was really lovely," but actually her favourite flower are roses. And how much better would it be if you asked the right question so that you knew that she really liked roses? It's a bit like that. It's like the relationship's okay, you know, but it could be so much better.
Maybe related to that, how do you see firms kind of getting over that cultural hump? A lot of times the culture is the blocking of new ideas and innovation and new strategies. When you see these new firms and see innovation, especially within established firms, how are they getting past that cultural roadblock?
Success. So if they can show success and then communicate it, other teams will follow. You know, it's kind of like evidence. They have to show that these new approaches work and that they will benefit them. And then, I mean, that's kind of the best way. The firms that get that right, or can manage to communicate that, are going to stand ahead. I mean, what's extraordinary is a lot of firms say to me, you know, they participate in the program, they find it really difficult to find innovations within their own firm because they don't know what everyone's doing. You know, you have a really big firm, people don't know that these guys are doing something really exciting on client service, and they don't translate it, like, even though they've got intranets, etc., etc. So some firms are using things like internal competitions and contests to get around that, and they work to a degree. Other firms, we're seeing a lot of firms beginning to use things like crowdsourcing and trying to, you know, draw ideas and make the strategy far more interactive. But I'd say the way firms get over it, a lot of it's leadership. You know, senior partner, chairman of a firm, or chairwoman of a firm can make a huge difference. Same with general counsel, which I think somehow disproportionate in a way to their roles, because firms sort of work on role models to such a degree. So I think if you've got enough kind of support within the firm for that initiative, it will go forward. It's a bit like Allen & Overy, which is one of the most innovative large firms. I mean, how did it do it? It had a very inspirational leader, David. He managed to bring in people that supported his mission, and they made a decision, and they got the partners to buy into it, that they weren't going to be a follower, they were going to be a first mover, and that they were going to adapt to the changing world, actually do something, but not just adapt, but try and get ahead of the changes. And they went into that knowing that would not work necessarily, that it might not work. But they did it anyway, so the leadership is obviously one. And then, you know, the being able to communicate success is another, and getting a caucus of stakeholders into it. And actually, I would say empowering the professionals that firms employ. It is extraordinary how firms don't use the resources that are at their fingertips, or allow themselves to use those resources.
Well, one of the things that's going to allow people to do more innovation in the future is that it's being recognized by somebody who's paying a lot of attention to it. And the fact that Reena has created a metric that now people are paying a lot of attention to is one of the important things. So
Yeah.
we're very grateful to have you here to share it with us. Thank